Okay, it looks like we're live. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Welcome everyone to the Fixing the World Restoration Series. I'm very excited today because we're going to be talking about one of the things that is the nearest and dearest to my heart is Klamath Dam removal. We do have a couple of announcements and then we'll just move on quickly to announce our guests. First of all, we wanted to let everyone know that obviously this is a series that happens every week, but next week we will have RES, which are the people who are doing the restoration after Klamath Dam removal on, but we'll be changing the time till noon. So we hope to see you next week. Please make sure to register if you're planning to come. And we also will be sharing this on Facebook and YouTube afterwards. So feel free to share within your classrooms or anywhere where you think that people will want to get more information on dam removal and dam removal restoration. We also wanted to let everyone know that our traditional ecological knowledge, science and management, and advocacy and water protection in Native California curriculum are on our websites. They're readily available and free to all teachers and communities. And we also have free poster packets and in-classroom assets for teachers. So if anyone's interested, just email us at info@californiasalmon.org. And then next week, we will be having the Northern California Land Back Symposium on March 24th at Cal Poly Humboldt. And we will also be having a land back and dam removal celebration that evening at the Eagle House Inn in Eureka. So we will be dropping the link on how to register for that in the chat. And then we just wanted to say that this series is part of a new educational initiative with the Yurok Tribe, with Cal Poly Humboldt's Native American Studies Department, and with the Intercept, which is the Indian Natural Resources, Science, Engineering, and Diversity and STEM program at Cal Poly Humboldt. And the reason we're doing it is we just really think that it's important to share with the community and especially our youth all the amazing things that are happening in the world of large-scale restoration. We're taking on some major things like dam removal of whole watersheds and mining restoration and things like that. And we're so proud to have the Yurok Tribe here today because they're really on the forefront of that work. And so with that, we also wanted to say that today is a really hard and sad day because the salmon fishing season, it's been declared, will be shut down this year. So this kind of work is just critically important to bringing back our salmon. So why we're so excited and hopeful, because we're talking about Klamath Dam removal and all the work happening to bring back the salmon, we just want to reiterate the fight's not done. We still really need to fight for our water, and we need to make sure these restoration programs are funded and that our salmon are getting what they need. And so with that, I am super excited to introduce our first speaker, Barry McCovey. And hold on while I pull up. Sorry about that. I don't have the bio right in front of me, which is not good. But Barry McCovey is from the Yurok Tribe, and he is a traditional person who lives in Klamath with his family. And I think he'll introduce himself more. And one of the things I just wanted to say is that Barry has been part of the fight to remove the Klamath Dam since the beginning and has been such an amazing person that has worked so hard to fight for our communities. And so I just really want to thank you for all your work. Like I said, this is the largest river restoration that's ever happened and the largest dam removal in the history of the world. And it took us 20 years to get here. And it's because of people like Barry, we're here today and we're moving forward. And so thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Regina. I really appreciate that. Yes, like Regina said, my name is Barry McCovey. I'm the director of the Yurok Tribal Fisheries Department. I've been working with the tribe in various capacities within the tribe's fisheries department since about 1999. So I've been done a lot of work in the Klamath Basin over the years and kind of various roles and responsibilities. I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy where we're at. It is a tough year. It's going to be another tough year for fishermen and for tribal people in the Klamath Basin this year. It looks like there aren't going to be many fish available for us to harvest. So all the more reason to fight harder for dam removal, to fight harder for restoration, and to fight harder for water rights. So that's kind of the basic introduction of myself. Regina, do you want me to go into my presentation now?
Yes, please do.
Okay, I'll share my screen. So I'm going to be talking kind of about the tribal perspective, the Yurok tribe's perspective, and my own kind of experience and our experience in the dam removal world, and kind of how we got to where we're at today. Some of the things that we had to go through, and some of the reasons why we're here. And then I think after that, Mark Bransom from the Klamath River Renewal Corporation will talk about a little bit of the process of how they got to where they're at, and then what some of the processes look like moving forward with dam removal. So just want to make sure, Regina, can you see my slides? Does everything look good?
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so like I said, I'm Barry Covey Jr. I'm the director of the Yurok Tribe's Fisheries Department, and I want to talk a little bit about Klamath dam removal. It's a huge topic. This topic could fill up days and days. There's been so much history and so much work has gone into it. There's been so many people who have dedicated their lives and careers to making this a reality. So just keep in mind, this is a very succinct summary of so much information. Wanted to start out with a picture of the mouth of the Klamath River, kind of where I live now, and just the kind of juxtaposition against the dams that are in the mid watershed. And here's a couple of the dams that we're planning on removing, and we hope to remove very soon. I think within a couple of years, around November of 2024, we hope to have these fully removed and have a free flowing river for the first time in over 100 years. And so that's extremely exciting to tribal people, to fishermen, to just people of the Klamath Basin, people who care about the river, people who care about watersheds. There's a lot of excitement around this in the entire world. This is a huge project. Something that I take from this and that I try to share with people is, when we first started this process 20 or so years ago, we were laughed out of the room, and people felt like this could never be a reality. But there's been a group of tribal members and NGOs and environmental groups, and some of our friends in the state and federal governments who have never given up and have continually applied pressure for decades now. And now we're here. We're on the precipice. We're right on the doorstep of the largest river restoration project in the history of the United States and maybe the world. And it just goes to show what perseverance and belief in doing what's right can get you. So anyone out there who has a dream of doing something incredibly challenging and huge and unimaginable, don't look to the Klamath and look at this dam removal project, and you can see that anything is possible with enough time and enough pressure. So it's kind of my intro to the whole thing. I'm really excited about it, as everyone is. So, the first kind of thought process that we're going to talk about is why remove the Klamath River dams from a tribal perspective. So I think the first part is when these dams were built, tribal people were living throughout the Klamath Basin, and we were never consulted. No one ever came to the tribes and said, "Hey, what do you think about us building a dam on this river to make hydropower," or whatever the decision process might have been to divert water. in those days, I don't think anyone even considered how it might impact tribal people. And so we weren't considered in any of the decisions to build these dams. And the tribes and our allies, that's just not right. Secondly, when those dams went in, they basically split the Klamath River basin and the Klamath River ecosystem in half. Not only did this eliminate hundreds of miles of anadromous fish habitat, whether it's for Chinook salmon or coho or lamprey, but this also stopped the flow of energy from downriver to upriver and from upriver to downriver. So no longer was the upper basin receiving marine nutrients that were transported via anadromous fish, and no longer was the downriver area receiving sediment inputs and all the nutrients and all the good things that come from the forests and lakes and marshes upstream of the project. And so he basically split the river in half, and you broke the ecosystem in half. And when that happened, there was ecosystem-wide impacts, and we feel those today. We've been feeling those for 100 years. Some very simple examples are like poor water quality, fish diseases, toxic algae, etc. So everything that was connected to that riverine ecosystem has suffered greatly. And in our analysis, it seems like that ecosystem is on the brink of collapse, and we can see that in the poor returns of salmon that we're hearing about in the last couple of weeks. The river is sick, and it's out of balance. And tribal people believe in balance. That's what we're here for. And this this program that we're a part of right now, this speaking here and presenting, is called is Fix the World. And that's what we believe in as tribal people, is fixing the world. So dam removal is a huge step towards restoring balance in the Klamath Basin. And that's a part of who we are as tribal people, is people who restore balance. And so this is a major move in the right direction as far as we're concerned, as far as repairing the ecosystem, but also restoring balance to the river and to the people. So, and just a quick kind of map of the Klamath Basin, and there's a lot of different things happening here. This is just to show you that the Klamath Basin is very large and very complex, and there's a lot of things happening in the Klamath Basin. There's the Trinity River and the diversions that happen over there. There's downstream tribes. There's downstream irrigators in the Scott and Shasta River valleys. There's the Klamath Irrigation Project. There's wildlife refuges. There's upstream irrigators. There's upstream tribes, and then, of course, there's the hydroelectric project that we're talking about today, and that's circled there in the middle. Part of this slide goes back to what Regina had mentioned earlier about dam removal being very important and significant to the restoration of this basin, but that there are many other issues that also need to be addressed. And I would really second that and say this is the biggest single step we can take towards restoration in the Klamath Basin, is dam removal, but it's just one step in a really long journey, and we still have a lot of issues that we need to deal with, whether it's dealing with the past. There was overfishing in the past by commercial fisheries in the lower Klamath. There was mining for a long time in the mid basin and upper basin. There's logging and poor forest management practices related to logging and the exclusion of good fire from the Klamath Basin. We're still dealing with the impacts of that and those actions. Of course, there's irrigation and there's diversions out of the Klamath River Basin that we're dealing with. And so goes on and on. But dam removal is at the top, is right near the top of that list of issues that plague the Klamath. And so this is, like I said, one of the biggest single steps we could move forward towards restoring balance back to this basin. So there's going to be four hydroelectric dams removed. Copco 1 and 2 and JC Boyle and Iron Gate. And I think Mark might get into a little more specifics on the actual dam removal, but just wanted to highlight that there's going to be 4 dams removed in this project. And what that will do. So here's another map of the basin, and this one's kind of showing, that there's all these different fish runs here, and the blue circles up here kind of show where there was some spring salmon historically, and spring salmon here in the Scott and Shasta and Salmon rivers. And over time, we put the dams in, and that basically removed, all the spring salmon from the upper basin. To go along with that, we're losing spring salmon from a lot of these other basins, and so you take the dams out, and hopefully we can start to restore the spring salmon runs to the upper basin. So spring Chinook are an extremely important part of the Klamath River ecosystem, and they're extremely important to tribes and fishermen all over the West Coast. And so a big part of this push is to try and help restore the runs of spring salmon. And historically, the upper Klamath Basin above the Klamath Project was probably full of spring salmon. We know for a fact that spring salmon spawned in a lot of the tributaries that flow into upper Klamath Lake. And so we're going to work really, really hard. It's going to take a long time, and we're prepared for a long battle and a lot of work in our future. But we're confident that a day will come when we will have spring salmon returning to the upper basin and spawning. So I want to talk a little bit about the timeline and how we got to where we're at. Believe me, this is very brief overview of mountains and mountains of data and science, and so much went into this, and so many people played a part and a role, and my role has been very small compared to what others have done, and I'm honored and humbled to be mentioned along with some of the people who have been here fighting for this for so long. So in 2000, relicensing began. That process went for a number of years, and in 2007, fish ladders were prescribed. That was the first EIS that was drafted by FERC. Dam removal wasn't a preferred option then, but the fish ladders would have been more expensive. And so because of that, Pacificor, the company that owns the Klamath Project and the dams, they started thinking about dam removal just because it was going to be so expensive, and there was a lot of unknowns. So in 2010, the original KHSA, the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, was signed up in Oregon, and we kind of had a deal on the table there. California and Oregon and Pacificor, we were all going to work together and remove the dams. That kind of fell apart over the years, and then in 2016, we signed the amended KHSA. It was signed here in Requa, and I think it failed in Congress, and that's when the Klamath River Renewal Corporation was formed, and kind of this new effort arose, sometime in there, that we were going to kind of change our strategy and keep on pushing. Mark is going to talk a little bit more about the Klamath River Renewal Corporation and its formation and how that plays into all of this. In 2020, California and Oregon agreed to become co-licensees, which kind of allowed us to keep moving forward. Warren Buffett, whose companies own Pacificor, and his company kind of started to support the project. And then in 2022, FERC finally kind of signed off on everything. And, I believe as of, this week or last week, there's actual construction starting on the project, which is really exciting. There's actually boots on the ground, and I think Kiewit and KRRC and maybe some other contractors are actually on the ground and moving things around and starting to actually work on this project, which is incredible. So throughout every one of these steps, you have to understand that there was so much happening. There was, so many scientific reports, so much policy, so much management, just a lot had to go into this. And there were a lot of partners and people involved. It was tribes and NGOs and federal and state partners and environmental groups. But I want to the tribes were really involved in the science and just kind of making the case that dam removal was good for the basin and good for the people. Sometimes, science and policy didn't seem to be enough to convince the powers that be that this was a good idea. And that's when a really important part of this kind of came into play. And that was the direct action of tribal members and NGOs and environmental groups, people who went out and protested. People flew to early on, Scottish Power owned Pacificor, and a group of people flew to Scotland and went to the shareholder meeting. People went to Omaha, Nebraska. We've been to Portland and Sacramento more times than we can count. And so that really helped push this across the finish line, I think. And I want to make sure that people understand that, you don't necessarily have to be involved in science. You don't have to be work for a tribe or a federal agency or an NGO. If you have something, if you feel like something needs to be done and there's, that's the right thing to do, there's a place for you. And that those people really help this process move forward. There's some milestones here that I'm not really going to talk too much about. I think Mark will cover these a little bit better, but it's just want you to know there was hundreds of permits and approvals, and we really had to work hard to get through this process. It wasn't an easy thing to do. It was hard, very hard, but with like I mentioned earlier, with that constant pressure and people always working on it and people knowing that this was the right thing to do, we made it through it. Earlier this year, the final surrender order was issued and ownership of the dams was handed over. And Mark will cover this a little bit better. And now, work has actually commenced. Like I mentioned earlier, things are actually happening up there today. So that's great. So just quickly, the positive impacts that we should see. I guess we'll start out with a potential negative impact is sediment. So there are going to be some significant but temporary sediment impacts when we drain the reservoirs. There might be some minor infilling of estuaries and some sediment deposition, but we expect that will slowly be washed out to sea over time, and we don't expect there to be any major impacts to the river or the ecosystem or fish resources related to the sediment. Some of the good news is, like I mentioned earlier, just the habitat. We're going to open up 400 miles of anadromous habitat to Chinook, coho, steelhead, and lamprey. It'll be the first time they'll be able to access some of these areas for over 100 years, and that's really exciting. That's fish need habitat, and so fish need water and habitat, and giving them all that extra habitat is a huge step in the right direction. Like I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit earlier about spring run Chinook, which are so important to the basin, and that habitat will be accessible, and that's great news. It's going to take some work to get them up there, but we're ready for that. We're ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work on that. This will provide geographic and genetic resiliency. That's something that's extremely important in light of climate change and in our changing world, our changing environment. We need genetic resiliency built into these runs of fish. That's something that the Klamath still has. A lot of river systems in the West that have salmon runs have lost their genetic resiliency. So they'll have one really homogenized run of fish because of hatchery practices and trucking and hauling and all these different methods people have used to try to get around fixing the actual problem, which is, not enough water, not enough habitat, and poor water quality, whatever it might be. So in the Klamath, we still have some genetic resiliency left, and that's going to be really important to maintain that genetic resiliency and to build new areas of genetic resiliency as we move into an uncertain future with climate change. This will provide a lot of cold water habitat. So there's a lot of cold water up there in the upper basin that just flows into these reservoirs that are created by the dams, and then it just warms up. It loses all of the good attributes that it had. Clean, cold water, really healthy, good water quality. That all goes away when the water sits in those reservoirs and becomes anoxic and filled with toxic algae. So when the dams are gone, we won't have the reservoirs, and that will greatly improve water quality. And that's something that we're really excited about. And then, disease impacts will lessen. Things will go back closer to how everything evolved, and that's really what we're shooting for here. We'll see less fish disease. And then, like I mentioned, the toxic algae is a huge problem for the river and for tribal people and just river users in general. There's times when you're not allowed to enter the river because it's toxic, because of this toxic algae that grows in these reservoirs. And so when we take those reservoirs out, we're hoping it will eliminate that problem of the toxic algae that we have in the Klamath. And then the ecosystem will be reconnected, and that's the most exciting part, and that's the most important part, I think, is we reconnect the Klamath, we reconnect that ecosystem. Everything in the basin, whether it's a aquatic insect or a fish or a bird or a bear, or even outside the basin, like killer whales out in the Pacific Ocean, they all depended on this ecosystem, and they all evolved with this ecosystem functioning in a specific way for millions and millions of years. And all that was taken away when this project and these dams were put in. So we're gonna restore the ecosystem. We're gonna try and get back towards that natural state that everything evolved with. And our belief is that the closer we can get to that natural state, the better everything that depends on the ecosystem, the better they will all be. So what are our next steps? We're gonna tear these things down, and we're ready to get to work. There's a lot of people involved who have been involved for a long time. There's a lot of people out there who want to work on this project, and the Yurok Tribe and the Copco Tribe and others are going to be up there doing as much of this work as we can. And so we're going to be looking for people to help us. And I just want to put that out there. There's going to be a lot of work to do to get this project across the finish line, and we're super excited about it. I think with that's all I have. I think I'm at about 20 minutes. So thank you all for having me speak here. I appreciate it. And I don't know if we're doing questions now or questions at the end. Thank you.
Yes, in the interest of time, I think we were going to save the questions to the end. So if you have questions, please put them in the question and answer rather than the chat, so we make sure we can get to you. And thank you so much for that, Barry. This is very exciting and super hopeful. And so with that, I'm very excited to introduce the director, the executive officer of the new owner of the Klamath River Dams, the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. Mark Bransom is the executive officer of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, the nonprofit entity responsible for removing the Klamath River hydroelectric dams and restoring project lands. He's worked for over 35 years on water resources and environmental restoration projects, and he's going to go through today how this process works and how we're actually going to get these dams down. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Regina. I really appreciate that. And thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate the work that Save California Salmon is doing. And Barry, thanks very much for that amazing presentation and the good setup. It's funny, Regina, that you mentioned that I've been doing this work for 35 years. And throughout that 35 years, believe me, I never thought that I would be the owner of an operating hydroelectric project, but here we are. And it's pretty exciting. So Anna is going to help drive through this slide presentation. So Anna, if you will just advance this quick look at the overview. We're going to talk just very briefly about the project overview, and then I'm going to get into schedule and some of the activities that we're going to be completing this year, looking ahead to 2024, the drawdown of the reservoirs and the removal of the dams, and then just very briefly take a look at the post-drawdown, post-removal years. And I know that you've got a future talk coming up with Resource Environmental Solutions, who's doing the restoration work in collaboration with the tribes and others. And so I won't get into those details today. So let's move a couple of slides forward. Anna, So as Barry said, yeah, the Renewal Corporation is kind of a born out of the 2016 settlement agreement. We are very narrowly focused. We have a single mission to restore fish passage and improve water quality through the hydroelectric reach, focusing specifically on decommissioning of these 4 hydroelectric dams. Next slide, please. So the 4 dams slated for removal, you saw a similar picture starting in the lower left corner. J.C. Boyle Dam up in Oregon, upper left, Copco number 1 dam, and then upper right, Copco number 2 dam. Copco number 2 is the small 35-foot high diversion dam. And then the most downriver dam in the lower right-hand corner there, Iron Gate Dam. Important to note that these dams and the reservoirs exist exclusively for the production of hydroelectric power. They don't store any water for agricultural or municipal uses, so removal of the dams and the reservoirs is not going to impact any agricultural interest or any municipal water users. And the dams are not operated for flood control. So they provide a very, very nominal flood control benefits. And so removing the dams is not going to have a major impact on downstream flooding. So the dams and the reservoirs don't add any water to the river, and they don't take any water out of the river. They're there to produce electricity, and that is their sole purpose. So let's move to the next slide then, please, Anna. And both Regina and Barry said this, and it really does warrant repeating, though, and that is that dam removal is a necessary but an insufficient measure to address the imbalance and the resource management issues in the Klamath Basin. And so while the Renewal Corporation is focused exclusively on dam removal and a little bit of restoration, we want to acknowledge that there is much, much more work to be done. And we're thankful that the tribes, the conservation groups, other advocacy groups like Save California Salmon and others are continuing to fight that fight, to look out to the future, to do the planning work, to do the on-the-ground work, to take a holistic approach to the work that needs to be done to restore that balance. And as the dam removal entity, the Renewal Corporation is proud and honored to really be standing on the shoulders of the tribes, the conservation community, and the advocacy community to get this dam removal work across the finish line. And we're optimistic that a lot of good work will be done going forward. So let's move through the next couple of slides. Anna, Barry really touched on this. Fisheries benefits, it's really about restoring the disruption in the connectivity of the upper and the lower parts of the basin and improving water quality conditions by eliminating those stagnant reservoirs, having the opportunity again then to take advantage of that good cold spring flow into the main stem of the Klamath River and produce better water quality conditions in hopes of reducing some of these disease conditions and other water quality attributes. Next slide, and some of these other water quality attributes that you see in these reservoirs really comes down to things like significant reduction in dissolved oxygen and imbalance in the acidity and the pH of the reservoirs. These toxic algae blooms that occur every summer in the warmer waters in the reservoir have significant impacts, and Barry talked about those, so I won't say any more about the significant need to address those conditions via dam removal. So next slide, Barry touched also on the key regulatory accomplishments and the significant body of work. The Renewal Corporation has really been working over the last, 7 years on obtaining all the necessary permits and authorizations and approvals, and it's a long list. As we sort of got our way through all of those permits, the big things that happened here in June of 21, we did receive the license transfer order from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, notifying the Renewal Corporation and California and Oregon that we had demonstrated that we had the technical, legal, and fiscal capacity to serve as co-licensees. And we asked FERC to hold that transfer in abeyance while they considered our surrender application. That's what FERC has been up to then since middle of 2021 up until November of 2022, when they completed NEPA and all of the Endangered Species Act, all of the National Historic Preservation Act requirements, and then in November of last year did approve and issue the surrender order. And then early December, the Renewal Corporation signed all the instruments of conveyance to transfer the facilities, the dams, the powerhouses, all the lands, and all the appurtenant structures and facilities from Pacific Corp to the new co-licensees, and hence making us the owners and operators of an active hydroelectric project. Pacific Corp does continue to operate the project to produce electricity, and they will continue to do so until we arrive at what's being called a facilities termination date. They will stop producing hydropower, and we will come in and initiate the drawdown of the reservoirs and the removal of the dams. So let's get into project schedule. A couple of slides here. The next slide, what you see here in the drawdown and dam removal schedule is really sort of breaking out the work that we've been doing up through 2022 was really the design and the construction document preparation and continuation of obtaining all of the necessary regulatory approvals. We're still obtaining some local county permits for some work that needs to be done at the Fall Creek Hatchery and building the worker camps and things of that nature. That should be wrapped up here in the next couple of months. Then we get into 2023 pre-drawdown activities. I'll talk more about what that is. Then next year, 2024, will be the drawdown of the reservoirs and the removal of the dams. And then 25 out to roughly 2030 will be the restoration period. And that'll be the subject of the talk that you will have in a future session. So let's go to the next slide. The construction schedule really breaks down the 2023 early construction work, all of the enabling construction projects that need to be done just to prepare us for the 2024 drawdown and dam removal. And we'll get into a little bit more of the details of the work that needs to be done in each of those years. So next slide, please, and we'll go straight into the 2023 drawdown. So we've got worker camp and job trailers and things that are being set up, essentially getting that work done starting now through the May timeframe. On May 7th, FERC issued a partial approval, giving us authorization to get started on road and bridge improvements, the relocation of the Wairika water line, and the removal of a number of existing recreation facilities around the dam. So we're underway with that work. We can officially acknowledge and celebrate that the early work on dam removal is now underway. So it's really, and it's an amazing time. It's a major accomplishment. It wouldn't be possible but for all of the work that the advocates have been doing over the last couple of decades. And for that, we will be forever grateful. So we're going to continue to do this work, getting to sort of the June timeframe. Some of the major work that needs to be done in preparation for the drawdown of the reservoirs is some low-level outlet improvements at Copco number 1 and Iron Gate Dam. At Copco number 1, we're literally going to drill and blast a 10.5-foot diameter tunnel through the base of Copco number 1. Copco number 1 is a large concrete dam, and we're going to push that all the way up within about 10 feet of the upstream side of the dam. And then we're going to hold off until we're ready to blast out that little bit of extra concrete to initiate the drawdown of the reservoir. We'll get started on the removal of the little Copco number 2 diversion dam starting around June. And that dam will be fully removed then by around Labor Day or end of September, early October. So the big work that has to happen is the preparation of these low-level outlet works to facilitate the drawdown. We've got the Iron Gate Tunnel low-level outlet work that needs to be done on this same time frame. And we'll get into a little bit more detail of that in the next coming slides. So let's take a look at some of the next slide and some of that work that's underway. Access to Copco number 1 and Copco number 2 is a big deal. Those dams sit down in a pretty tight canyon, steep side slopes. So the contractor, Kiewit, is out there now initiating work to improve the access down to the to the dams for the large construction equipment, so they can get down to these dams and actually get started on this big work, the preparation of Copco number 1, the new outlet tunnel, and then get started on the removal of Copco number 2. And then we've got some housing and some other structures around these 2 dams that we need to get started on decommissioning of as well. Let's take a look at the next couple of slides here. This is really kind of an example of what's going to happen at Copco number 2 in the 2023 pre-drawdown period. We're going to drill and blast Copco number 2, and then we'll sort of restore the channel between that. If we go to the next slide and we run a little animation, we'll see that what we're going to do is we're going to allow Copco Reservoir to fill. Iron Gate will be filled up at the beginning, and then we'll be able to draft from Iron Gate Reservoir, and we'll have flows coming into Copco Reservoir. When the river is dry in between, we'll take Copco number 2 dam down, and then we'll restore the river channel through there. So Copco 2 will be out of the way when we get ready in early 2024, then to initiate the drawdown of the reservoirs at J.C. Boyle, at Copco number 1 and Iron Gate. So let's move into the next slides then, and we're going to talk a little bit about this adit. Again, we're going to be drilling and blasting this brand new tunnel through the base of Copco number 1. It's going to be a 10.5 foot diameter. It'll be a little over 150 feet, something in that vicinity. We'll be working from a work pad that will be established at the base of Copco number 1. When we're ready to get going on that, we're going to build a spillway apron on top, and we're going to extend that tunnel with a 10-foot diameter steel outlet pipe that will be where we actually will have the water coming out from behind the dam into the river, and we'll get that all installed this year and ready to go for next year. So let's move into the next couple of slides. So that prepares us then for 2024. So come January 1st of 2024, we'll have made all the preparations for the drawdown of the reservoirs. The drawdown of the reservoirs is going to take place during the winter when we have sort of the least biological activity. Barry mentioned that there are going to be significant but temporary impacts in the river from the sediment mobilization and the transport of the accumulated sediment from behind the dams down through the lower part of the river and out into the Pacific Ocean. So we've got to do this work during the winter. So primarily that work will take place in January, February, and March. If we need to take a little pause then in April, if there's some activity, some outmigration of coho juveniles or other activity that we want to sort of have a temporary improvement of water quality conditions, we can take a pause there, and then we can start the drawdown up again with following the spring freshet kind of in the May timeframe. That'll allow us then to get all that sediment flushed out and be ready to initiate the actual physical removal of those big 3 dams kind of in the June timeframe, and then have those completely removed and a free-flowing river condition established in the roughly the October, early November time period in 2024. So let's go to the next slide then. Copco number 1, consistent and concurrent with dam removal. There's a number of other structures. In the left-hand side of this photograph, you see the penstocks coming from the dam down to the Copco number 1 powerhouse there. And so we'll be removing the powerhouse, the penstocks, the buildings that sit up on the top of the hill, and some of the other facilities and structures around Copco number 1 and Copco number 2. We'll go to the next slide, please. J.C. Boyle is a dam that is part earth material and part concrete spillway. There are some existing diversion culverts that are underneath the concrete section of the dam. When we're ready to initiate the drawdown, we're going to blast out some stop logs that are at the upstream side of the dam and these culverts. Those stop logs are thin concrete walls that prevent the water from flowing out. We'll blast those out to initiate the drawdown of J.C. Boyle. So the 3 reservoirs are going to be drawn down essentially simultaneously. J.C. Boyle, Copco number 1, and Iron Gate. Draw those down simultaneously and use the water power from the reservoirs and coming down through the river and use the water power from the hydraulic head of the reservoirs to mobilize and flush that sediment out from behind the dams and then down the river. Next slide, please. So once the reservoir is fully drawn down, we've got that spring freshet. The earthen portion of the dam will be removed for Boyle, and then we'll start removing the concrete section of that. We're going to put some of that material up on the uplands around the current reservoir site and spread that material out and grade it and plant it, make it a more natural hill slope and upland site around the reservoir. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a picture that kind of shows an overview of the J.C. Boyle facilities. As I said, we'll get the earthen section of the dam and then the concrete section of the dam. In that upper right-hand photograph, if you kind of look bottom center of that photograph, you see what is referred to as the existing scour hole. That's a hole on the steep bank from the forebay of the power canal down to the river, where in an emergency situation, water is diverted from the forebay down to the river, and it's created this significant scour hole there. We're going to use some of the concrete material and some of the earthen material from the removal of J.C. Boyle Dam to fill that scour hole in and to create a more natural restored condition there. So we'll fill it in with the material from the dam. We'll topsoil it, and then we'll plant it, do a little contouring before planting it, and again, try to restore a more natural condition there that existed before the dams. Let's go to the next slide, please. Iron Gate Reservoir drawdown and dam removal. Iron Gate is a large clay core earthen dam. So we'll use this diversion tunnel that you see in the lower center of the picture, pointing to the outlet of the tunnel in the dam. We're going to do some improvement work in that tunnel this year to make sure that it is ready to handle the hydraulic forces, all the water and the sediment that will come through that tunnel when we open the gates and initiate the drawdown. And then 2024, we'll have the removal of all these facilities, the penstocks on the right side, the powerhouses. There's some old hatchery holding tanks and processing buildings and facilities that will be removed. And then on the left side there of the photo, you see the large spillway. That spillway will be filled in with some of the concrete and some of the earthen material. Also, that will be contoured and graded over and then planted and kind of create a little bit more natural view there. And then one of the things that I think is really cool about the decommissioning and the removal of Iron Gate Dam is that most of that earthen material that makes up the dam is going to be taken back up the hill just off the right-hand side of the photograph here, and it will be placed back in the original borrow pit, the place where the material was originally excavated to build the dam. We're going to put it back in that big hole in the ground. We'll contour that over and similarly replant that and make a more natural looking area out of that original borrow pit. So we're going to put that dam material right back where it came from. And again, all this work will be wrapped up by roughly the October timeframe of 2024, and we'll have that free-flowing river condition at that point. And that's when we'll start to see some of the restoration work get underway. Primarily, planting is the initial work on the remaining sediments in the reservoir footprints that will take place right after the drawdown is completed and while the dams are being removed. So let's jump to the next slide, please, Anna. We've got a hydroelectric project that's going away. We're not going to be producing hydroelectricity, so we don't need substations and transmission and distribution lines for some of the immediate facilities, so we'll be removing those. Pacific Corp will continue to own and operate and maintain some other transmission facilities and distribution facilities and switch stations, because they will have other facilities that will be connected to the larger California grid. And so some of those facilities will remain, but we'll be getting rid of the immediate facilities that are no longer required with the removal of the dam and the facilities. So let's Go to the next slide and talk just very briefly about post drawdown. This schedule basically shows that restoration construction will take place starting in 2025. Actually, as I said, in 2024, as the dams are being removed, we'll get some early planting done. And then 2025, the full-scale restoration will get underway. Then the monitoring and the maintenance is expected to go all the way out to 2030, consistent with complying with all of our permit terms and conditions. RES will use what they refer to as an adaptive management strategy, and I know they'll talk more about what that means and how they will implement that in the presentation that they'll do next session, I believe. Water quality monitoring will be an important part of this. Tributary connectivity, making sure that those really important tributaries will have easy access for flow into the main stem of the Klamath River, and that migrating fish and other species will have access up into that important tributary habitat as well. So with that, let me stop there. And again, thank Regina. We'll go to the last slide there. Thank Regina and Save California Salmon for the opportunity to present. Great to see all of you today. And thanks again to Barry and all of the tribal folks who have been involved in this work and really fighting the good fight. And again, the Renewal Corporation is just honored to play a small part of getting this important work across the finish line. So Regina, thanks again. I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. It's just very inspiring to see a presentation on the scheduling and how everything's going to happen, because I know a lot of us who have worked on this for a long time have been like, we want to learn everything we can about how this is going to happen, and we want to teach everyone along the river how this is going to happen, because we've never seen anything like this before. So yeah, thank you so much. And we do have a couple questions. I have a question for you also. I was wondering if there had been talk about what is going to happen with the land after dam removal. And then my other question is a little more personal. I was wondering if there was ever going to be an opportunity after the dams come out for us to have a big celebration out there.
Yeah. So do you want me to take those questions?
Yeah, maybe the first one would be what happens to the land once the dams are removed? Because I just know that I've been like really in awe learning about the level of restoration that's happening. But then I'm like, well, what happens when the restoration's over?
Yeah,
so I was just wondering if there was talk on that.
Yeah, there has been. In fact, the 2016 settlement agreement spells that out in great detail. And so the process is basically that the 8,000 acres of land that make up the hydroelectric project have now been transferred to the Renewal Corporation and the states of California and Oregon as co-licensees. Ultimately, though, that land will be transferred completely to the respective states. So Oregon lands to the state of Oregon, California lands to the state of California, or to their third-party designee. So the settlement agreement allows for the states to establish processes by which they will either take the lands under state stewardship, or they will direct the Renewal Corporation to transfer certain parcels of land to parties with whom they have entered into agreements for those transfers. The settlement agreement also further articulates that the lands will always be held in trust for public interest. And so public interest means things like recreation, fish and wildlife, open space, and things like that. So in addition to the restoration work, we're working with the recreation community for purposes of identifying the type and location of the recreation facilities that will be constructed. The states ultimately will take responsibility for long-term ownership, maintenance of those facilities, but that's kind of the ultimate disposition of the lands. On your second question about celebration and ceremony, we certainly are currently working with the tribes for purposes of ensuring that any tribal entity, that any tribe that wants to hold a ceremony or a prayer will have the opportunity to do that at the outset of dam removal, and then we envision after the dams are removed and it's no longer an active construction site, that there will be plenty of opportunity for people to come and celebrate the completion of the the work as well. More details, I'm sure, to come on that. I don't know exactly what that will look like, but yeah, we are certainly anticipating a high level of interest and making access available for people to do these things.
Thank you so much. We have a couple questions in the chat. I wanted to check in to see, Barry, do you have any questions? You good?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so our first question is from Julie Alexander. She said, Mark, great overview, thank you. I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about the timeline for hydro peaking below Boyle. Did it end when Pacific Corp handed over the reins, or is it still happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you for that. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about that. So as I mentioned, Pacific Corp is still operating the project much like they did before. They're making some accommodations in the operation for our construction work. But as of right now, we can anticipate maintaining the peaking flows at Boyle. We're going to have a little bit of a shutoff period in the first week or so of June. But from roughly mid-June through Labor Day, we've committed to maintaining the peaking flows to the very best of our ability. The only circumstances that would, result in any additional shutdown or modification to the current flow regime would be if we have some sort of an unforeseen circumstance that has the potential to impact our construction schedule or budget. And we will assess that scenario. And if we conclude that there's no way to stay on our schedule to be prepared for 2024 drawdown and dam removal, we may modify the peaking flows below Boyle. So we've been working very closely with the recreation community and the rafting, whitewater rafting recreation folks who are very interested in knowing what kind of a season to expect. So we've made that commitment and we are using that threshold test so that we can live to that commitment with the exception of anything that might throw us off of our 2023-2024 preparations. I hope that answers the question sufficiently. If not, follow up or come back to me.
Awesome. So we have two more questions, and then I'm sorry, I will have to cut it off at that point. Or actually, I think we have three. So I'm not sure if you guys can stay a couple minutes late. We can decide that after this next question, maybe. But the next question is, what process should we use to pressure California and Oregon to return the lands to the tribes if the tribes want it?
Yeah, Georgina, that's a great question. Thank you. And the states of California and Oregon are in the process of putting some more detail on exactly what the process will be. I know that California in particular has already done a significant amount of tribal outreach, and there are a lot of conversations ongoing to ensure that tribes have an opportunity to express their interest. And Oregon, I think, is a little bit different. I think Oregon is just basically going to start with taking the lands under state stewardship and then rolling out a process. But I will just again reiterate that California has already initiated their thinking and some work on that. But if you have questions or you want to put a little bit of additional leverage and pressure, go to the tribal liaison at the CNRA, the resources agency, and let them know of your interests.
Yeah, and I can actually put a little plug in right here for Save California Salmon and Cal Poly Humboldt are doing a land back conference and symposium next week, and they will actually be there. So that might be a great place to ask your questions if you have the opportunity to go. And then also, before I move on to the next questions, because I know we're going to start running out of time, I just wanted to mention that this will be put on YouTube so people can watch it and share it, and it will be used to make future curriculum for our youth. And we are also planning field trips to the Klamath Dam sites right now, which we're working with KRRC on, and we're going to try to do before and after field trips for our communities so that we can see the work in progress. Obviously, we can't access active dam removal sites, but we're doing what we can for local people in schools to be able to see the dams before and after. So if you want to be involved in that, please get a hold of us. I'm okay with going about 5 minutes late, so I'm going to ask the next question. And then if Barry and Mark can stay on, then we can ask the final question. And so the next question is for Barry. And it's Barry, what are the tribe's biggest funding needs in the next few years, and where can private philanthropy be helpful?
That's a great question. I can't speak for every tribe, but I can speak for the Yurok Tribe and our fisheries department and kind of where we stand. I know it's a pretty funding rich environment right now as far as planning and implementation goes related to restoration projects associated with the Klamath Basin. We'll see how that goes in the next 5 or 10 years. We'll see how that funding plays out. If there continues to be funding available for things like restoration activities associated with dam removal that aren't under the purview of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. So there are going to be some more restoration needs after that kind of 2030 timeline that Mark had laid out. So that's going to be an issue. More immediate though is the tribes sometimes have issues with infrastructure. So there's all this work to do and all this funding out there, but it can be tough for tribes to get that funding and to make those projects happen because a lot of times we lack some of the infrastructure that we might need. So whether we're talking about equipment, large pieces of equipment or scientific instruments, whatever it might be, to help us survey and plan and design and implement these restoration projects, or infrastructure as far as staffing goes. Sometimes we don't have enough people to plan these projects. Sometimes we don't have enough people to organize collaborations with others. Nothing in the basin happens without collaboration. And so sometimes we're looking for funding to help get the ball rolling on collaborating with other tribes and NGOs and the state and whoever wants to collaborate and help out. So infrastructure needs would be my biggest need for tribes in the near future. Thank you.
Yeah, and one thing I would think, the question's not for me, but I would like to mention just in general is that, dam removal is funded, but outreach on dam removal, education, making sure the local community knows what's going on, making sure that the tribes can express what's going on to their tribal members, those types of things are not funded, and they're critically important because there's tons of misinformation going around right now. That's why we're so dedicated to the education part of this currently. And then another thing is that people all over the world want to hear about dam removal. I'm sure Barry gets requests for speaking all of the time. We get requests a lot too. And those things are also not funded. Like the Klamath Salmon Run, huge run that goes 400 miles up the river and has really helped build the movement for dam removal is largely not funded. Is something that's really funded through like bake sales and things of that nature. I think it's also critically important that the tribes and other organizations get funding to make sure the community can keep doing this work and keep talking about this work and keep being an inspiration to the world through this work. Because, restoration funding is coming down like crazy right now, but the community doesn't know what's happening. They see these bulldozers on the ground and they don't know what they're doing. And because there's not that information and support for the tribes to make sure the community is involved on the level they need to be, there's a lot of confusion. And so that would just be my thoughts too on where private philanthropy funding could be very helpful. And then we have one more question. The question is, what will be left behind of some of the dam structures as relics or reminders, or is it the goal to make it all disappear?
Yeah, I'll just say that generally the goal is to remove all of the facilities, and there will be several structures, namely some housing and a shop and one of the powerhouses that at this time we anticipate leaving. Those facilities will have future uses that have been interest in future use has been expressed. So we're going to leave those facilities. The CDFW has need for a shop related to the hatchery and things of that sort. But the overall goal is to remove as much of the dam and powerhouses and canals and penstocks and things of that sort, so that there really is no visual legacy of the majority of the facilities.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And that is our final question. Next week, we will be able to be having another one on reviving the Klamath River after large-scale dam removal with Resource Environmental Solutions and the Cal Poly Humboldt's Intercept Plus program, or I mean, sorry if I did not say that right, with Lonix, who is here. Intercept Plus is such a great program. And then the week after that, we will be talking about coastal redwood watersheds large-scale restoration and Prairie Creek with Felicity Cross from the Yurok Tribe. And then on April 5th, we'll be talking about restoring Central Valley watersheds and fish passage in those areas. And that will be with the Mechoopda tribe in California trout. And then we will be announcing the next shows in the series after that. So please join us for those next ones. I think the restoration one will be really great. I've had my mind blown with the level of restoration planning that's happening right now. So we hope to see you next week. And then we hope that you can also learn more about the coastal restoration and Central Valley restoration that's happening. And then of course, on March 24th is our Land Back Conference at HSU. It's the Northern California Land Back Symposium. And there will be a celebration afterwards of all the wonderful dam removal and wonderful land back efforts that are happening in the North Coast. So we hope you can join us. Information about all of this is on our website and on our social medias, and this will be posted on YouTube hopefully tomorrow and will be available on Facebook for the rest of the day. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. True.
Thank you.